Shifting focus away from Canada, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has met Russia's President Vladimir Putin in Sochi in Russia for talks on Syria. Remember, Kremlin had earlier said that Turkey needs the Syrian government's permission for the deployment of its forces on Syrian territory. During the meeting, Vladimir Putin said that the situation in Syria was very tense and that the two nations will find solutions together. Erdogan reiterated on Putin's statement, saying that the meeting will prove to be very beneficial for the region.
Ситуация в регионе очень острая, мы это все видим, понимаем. И думаю, наша встреча сегодняшняя, наши консультации очень востребованы. Хочу выразить надежду на то, что тот уровень российско-турецких отношений, который достигнут за последнее время, он сыграет свою роль в урегулировании всех вопросов сложных, которые в регионе сложились на сегодняшний день, и позволит найти ответы на все, даже очень сложные вопросы в интересах как Турции, так и России, в интересах всех стран.
Bu davetin gerçekten çok bölgede kritik günleri yaşadığımız sürece faydalar sağlayacağına inanıyorum. Bu vesileyle de tabii ki bu barışın çok daha güçlü bir şekilde ele alınmasına fırsat sağlayacak.
Данное сегодняшнее наше совещание, наша встреча позволит нам более подробно обсудить данную ситуацию и это позволит решить несомненно мир.
Barış Pınarı Harekatı'na bu görüşmemizin çok ciddi fırsatlar sağlayacağına inanıyorum.
Remember, hours before the meeting, Erdogan had threatened to resume Turkey's offensive with, quote-unquote, greater determination if the Kurdish forces don't pull out completely.
İlgili birimlerimiz sahada süreci çok yakından takip ediyor. Amerika'nın ülkemize verdiği sözler tutulmazsa harekatımızı kaldığı yerden bu sefer çok daha büyük bir kararlılıkla devam ettireceğiz.
So this meeting will determine Turkey's next move to a large extent. It remains to be seen whether Erdogan will seek a settlement with Russia on the Syrian cities where the Syrian government and Russian forces deployed their troops last week. And we are tracking the latest on Turkey's moves when it comes to resuming its offensive. Bear in mind, we are already receiving reports over the last few days of the ceasefire not really being a ceasefire, of shots being fired, but officially the ceasefire is ending, and as it ends, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan meeting Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Bear in mind, Russian forces have moved in to the Syria, Iraq and Syria-Turkey border to fill the void left by the withdrawal of US troops already. So it's very clear as to what Russia's intentions are at this point in time, which is to gain greater influence in West Asia. And to that end, Putin having discussions with Turkey's President Erdogan, even as the world has asked for a ceasefire to be called in Syria. Meanwhile, the global condemnation of Turkey's invasion does continue. This time, European Council President Donald Tusk has told European Union lawmakers that no one has been fooled by the ceasefire and urged Turkey to end its military action permanently. He further stated that any other course would mean a victory for the Islamic State and a serious threat to European security.
The European Council condemned Turkish unilateral military action in north-east Syria. No one is fooled by the so-called ceasefire. Turkey needs to end its military action permanently, withdraw its forces, and respect international humanitarian law. Any other course means unacceptable human suffering, a victory for Daesh, and a serious threat to European security. The European Council also reconfirmed its full solidarity with Cyprus, faced with Turkey's illegal drillings off its coast.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has compared the fighting between Turkey and Kurdish forces to, and I quote here, two kids in a playground. They fight, you let them fight for a minute, and then you pull them apart. Away from that, in the UK, parliamentarians have started debating on Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement in the House of Commons as we speak. And the discussion in the Parliament comes ahead of a vote tonight that will indicate whether there is enough support for the pact in principle. There'll be around 7 hours of debate before we get to the point of voting. And these are live visuals coming in from the House of Commons in the British Parliament, where Prime Minister Boris Johnson is making a case for his Brexit deal.
Of free trade, perhaps the single greatest engine of global prosperity. A new deal enabled by this legislation will allow us to sign free trade agreements around the world. And I will give way with pleasure to the honourable ladies.
Thank the Prime Minister for giving way. Schedule 5A of the Act lists workers' retained European Union rights. The directive on work-life balance for parents and carers is omitted from the schedule, along with many others in the same vein. How can those omissions be consistent with the Prime Minister's commitment to the highest possible standards for workers' rights?
Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear that we will maintain the highest possible standards, but I would be very happy to study what the honourable lady says, but I can assure her that there will be whatever the House believes has been omitted can easily be replaced. And I give way to the honourable lady from Don Valley.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way.
And now we have Natalie Powell joining us live from London to get a sense of what is the latest as far as Britain is concerned. Natalie, thank you so much for being with us here on WION Dispatch. Talk to us. Boris Johnson is still trying valiantly inside the House of Commons to at least get his deal heard. But even at this point in time, it is nothing but a state of flux. That's what the British Parliament is in.
Yes, absolutely. This is arguably one of the most important days to date for his Brexit deal. MPs are debating this withdrawal agreement bill, which is essentially a package of all of the different UK laws that would need to be enacted in order for the UK to leave the EU under the terms of the deal that Boris Johnson secured with the EU in Brussels. Now, MPs have had just 17 and a half hours before this debate took place to receive this withdrawal agreement bill. That was also overnight as well, and take a look at it. It's 110 pages long, and now they are debating the contents of it. This, of course, before two very key votes that are going to take place after many hours of debate here in the UK. The first vote is on whether MPs in principle agree to the terms of Boris Johnson's deal. Of course, if that goes through, if MPs vote, a majority of MPs vote in favour of it, then that will be a symbolic achievement for the UK Prime Minister. He certainly have gotten further than his predecessor Theresa May did with regards to Brexit. The second vote, though, is going to be all to watch for, though. This is whether MPs vote in favour of the timetable that Boris Johnson has set out to get this entire package of laws through Parliament. Now, Boris Johnson has said he needs that to take place in just 3 days. And of course, that's causing a few concerns among MPs who say that 3 days is simply not long enough to debate all of this in such an important matter. Of course, if one or even both of those votes gets voted down, then it's very likely that Boris Johnson will then ask the EU for an extension beyond the 31st of October deadline, and we could very likely see even an election being called after that as well.
an election being called after that. We still have a lot more to go before that, Natalie. But for now, you talk to us in terms of what is expected from the day, because there is a vote tonight. And at the end of the day, that vote, in terms of how it's going to go, what is the sense that you're getting?
Yeah, very difficult to predict the second vote. The first vote, with MPs signalling if in principle they agree with Boris Johnson's deal. A lot of rumblings in Westminster suggest that actually that vote could go through, that there are enough opposition party members that have signalled that they would approve his deal. The second, with regards to the timetable, well, that is anybody's guess at the moment. There are the government argument, which suggests that actually 3 days is plenty of time, given this is something that has been debated for the past 3 years, that it's in some respects a similar deal to the one that Theresa May brought back from Brussels, and therefore a lot of it has already been debated anyway. But then there is the other side of the argument from MPs who say, look, this is a really important thing that's happening. These are very important UK laws that need to be enacted, and therefore we need more time than just 3 days to debate them and therefore to vote on them.
Natalie Powell joining us with that live update straight from London. Thank you, Natalie, for being with us here on WION Dispatch.